Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine standing on a narrow stone bridge in the middle of the night. The year is 1492. There are no streetlights, no cameras, no crowds with gelato cups and selfie sticks. Just darkness and the gentle lap of black water against ancient stone. A single oil lamp flickers in a window 3 stories above you. Its amber light trembles across the canal's surface, creating patterns that dance and disappear. You can hear the distant sound of oars cutting through water. Slow, rhythmic. Someone is coming home, or perhaps leaving forever. You'll never know which. This is Venice before the tourists arrived. Before the city became a museum of itself. Before every stone was photographed a million times. This is the Venice that worked, that schemed, that built an empire while the rest of Europe slept. Have you ever wondered what these canals witnessed in the centuries before anyone thought to preserve them? What secrets sank beneath these waters? What conversations echoed off these walls when the speakers believed no one would ever remember? Tonight, we're going to walk through that forgotten world together. Slowly, gently. We're going to let the Empire of Venice reveal itself the way it actually existed. Not as a postcard, not as a romantic backdrop, but as a living, breathing, sometimes brutal, always mysterious civilization built on nothing but wooden stakes and human ambition. Before we begin, I want you to get comfortable. Adjust your pillow. Let your shoulders drop. Release the tension in your jaw. Because we have all night. 5 hours to drift through centuries. And we're going to take our time. The story of Venice begins not with beauty, but with terror. Not with marble palaces, but with mud and desperation. And perhaps that's why it feels so real, even now, even after all these centuries have passed like water through fingers. Picture this. It's the year 421. Or maybe 452. The historians can't quite agree, and perhaps that uncertainty is fitting for a city that always kept its secrets close. The Roman Empire is collapsing. Barbarian armies are sweeping down from the north. Visigoths, Huns, Ostrogoths. Names that sound like nightmares because that's exactly what they were. You're a Roman citizen living in the prosperous towns of the Veneto. Aquileia, Padua, Altinum. You've heard the rumors. Cities to the west have been burned. Families have been scattered like leaves. And now you can see the smoke on the horizon. What would you have done in that moment? When everything you knew was about to be destroyed? When the choice was between certain death and an impossible gamble? Some people chose to run toward the sea, toward the marshes, toward a landscape so hostile that surely no army would follow them there. They were wrong about that last part, but they were right about the marshes being hostile. The Venetian lagoon, you see, was not empty water waiting for a beautiful city. It was a maze of mudflats, shallow channels, and treacherous tides. People had fished there for centuries, built temporary shelters on the small islands during fishing season, but no one lived there. No one would want to, unless living in hell was better than dying in your home. And so they came, families carrying what they could, nobles who were suddenly equal to their servants in terror, priests clutching holy relics, children who didn't understand why they couldn't go back. They came to islands with names like Rialto, Torcello, Murano. Islands that were barely islands at all, just slightly higher patches of marsh that stayed above water most of the time. Can you imagine that first night? Huddled on the mud with your family, listening to the wind across the water, wondering if you'd made a terrible mistake, if you'd traded your home for a slow death by exposure? But morning came, and then another morning, and slowly, almost without anyone deciding to do so, the refugees realized something extraordinary. They were still alive. The barbarians had moved on. And these islands, these miserable muddy islands, had a strange advantage. They were surrounded by water that only the locals understood. You see, the lagoon had its own rhythms, its own secrets. Channels that looked deep at high tide became mud traps at low tide. Passages that seemed direct led to dead ends. An army on horses, no matter how fierce, couldn't cross water, couldn't navigate the maze, couldn't even find you if you knew how to disappear into the marshlands' complexity. And so the temporary refuge became something else. Something patient. Something that would grow, season by season, stake by stake, into the most unlikely empire the world had ever seen. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's slow down. Let's start at the very beginning, when Venice wasn't Venice at all. Just mud and hope, and the quiet determination of people who had nowhere else to go. The water is dark tonight. The lamp in the window has gone out. But somewhere in the distance, you can still hear those oars, cutting through the canal in their ancient rhythm. Are you ready to go deeper? To descend into the centuries like a stone sinking through black water? Good. Let your breathing slow. Let your mind drift. The Forgotten Empire is waiting. Part 1. The birth in the marshes building on nothing. Breathe slowly now. In through your nose. Out through your mouth. We're going back in time. Back to the mud. Back to the beginning. It's the 6th century. The refugees have been living in the lagoon for several generations now. The oldest among them can barely remember the mainland. Remember solid ground that didn't shift with the tides. The children know only this: water and sky, fog and fish, and the constant, endless work of making the impossible possible. Because here's what you need to understand about building a city on water. It shouldn't work. Every engineer, every architect, every person with common sense would tell you it's madness. Stone buildings need stone foundations. Stone foundations need bedrock. And beneath the Venetian lagoon, there is no bedrock. Just mud. Soft, silty mud going down and down and down. And yet, have you ever watched something impossible become real? Simply because no one told the people doing it that it couldn't be done. The early Venetians developed a technique that would define their city for the next 1,000 years. They cut down forests, oak forests in Istria and Dalmatia, across the Adriatic, and shaped the wood into long piles. Stakes. Thousands of them. Hundreds of thousands. Eventually millions. Imagine standing on the shore of one of these marshy islands at dawn. The fog is so thick you can barely see your own hands. But you can hear the sounds, the rhythmic hammering as wooden piles are driven into the mud. Splash. Thud. Splash. Thud. Over and over and over. The sound that would echo across centuries. They drove these piles deep into the mud until they hit a layer of compressed clay, hard clay called Coranto. The wooden stakes, submerged in salt water and deprived of oxygen, wouldn't rot. They would petrify over time, becoming almost like stone themselves. On top of these piles, they laid platforms of horizontal wood, and on those platforms, finally, they could begin to build. Can you picture the patience this required? The absolute faith? You couldn't see the foundation once it was underwater. You had to trust that the invisible work beneath the surface would hold. Trust that your calculations were correct. Trust that the tide wouldn't betray you. Every building in Venice, from the humblest house to the grandest palace, rests on this forest of wooden stakes driven into mud. The city is quite literally built on trees standing upside down in the darkness beneath the water. Doesn't that seem like something from a dream? A fairy tale? And yet you can go to Venice today and see buildings that have stood for 800 years, still resting on those original wooden piles, still defying gravity and common sense and the slow, patient pull of the sea. But let's return to those early centuries. The work was brutal. Imagine the labor, cutting the trees in distant forests, hauling them to the coast, loading them onto boats, rowing them across the Adriatic, because remember, the Venetians didn't have great sailing ships yet, just rowboats and muscle and determination. Then driving the piles, one by one, while standing in water up to your waist, while the sun beat down or the winter wind cut through your clothes, while your hands blistered and bled and calloused over and blistered again. Who are these people? Most of them will never know. History remembers the doges and the merchants and the admirals, but it forgets the thousands of workers who did the actual building. The pile drivers, the carpenters, the laborers who waded through marsh water 6 days a week, who went home at night smelling of sweat and salt, who built an empire with their bodies without ever knowing that's what they were doing. What do you think they dreamed about, these forgotten builders? When they lay down at night in their small houses made of wood and wattle, did they dream of solid ground? Of the cities their grandparents had fled? Or had the lagoon already become home? Had its rhythms already entered their blood? The settlement patterns in those early centuries were different from what would come later. People clustered around churches, small wooden churches, nothing like the marble basilicas that would rise later. Each island became its own small community. Torcello, Murano, Burano, Malamaco, Rialto. They fished, of course. The lagoon was rich with fish, sole and mullet and eel. They harvested salt from salt pans, back-breaking work under the summer sun. But salt was valuable, salt was currency, salt meant survival. And slowly, carefully, they began to trade. This is important. Let this sink in for a moment. The Venetians were never farmers. They couldn't be. The soil in the lagoon was too salty, too poor. They couldn't grow wheat or grapes or olive trees like mainland Italians. Every piece of bread they ate had to come from somewhere else. Every drop of wine, every brick they used for building. From the very beginning, Venice had to trade or die. This shaped everything. Their politics, their ethics, Their identity. They became merchants not by choice but by necessity. The sea wasn't romantic to them, it was survival. Can you feel how different that is? How it changes everything. When you must trade to eat, you learn to negotiate, to speak many languages, to understand the needs and wants of strangers, to see the world not as a collection of enemies and allies, but as a vast network of potential partners. Potential prophets. But we're still in the early days. The 6th century is bleeding into the 7th. The settlements in the lagoon are growing, but they're still fragmented, still isolated. There's no Venice yet. Not really. Just a collection of island communities loosely connected by water and shared memory of the terror that drove them there. The Byzantine Empire, still clinging to life in Constantinople, technically governs this region. They appoint officials called tribunes to manage the lagoon settlements. But Constantinople is far away, and the lagoon is easy to ignore, easy to forget. And in that forgetting, in that neglect, something new is being born. Because here's what happens when you leave people alone to solve their own problems. They develop their own ways, their own laws, their own sense of identity. By the year 697, the lagoon communities have grown tired of Byzantine-appointed officials who don't understand their world. So they do something radical, something that will echo through 1,000 years of history. They elect their own leader from among themselves. They call him the Doge. From the Latin dux, leader, commander. The first Doge is a man named Paolo Lucio Anafesto, though some historians question whether he actually existed or was invented later to give Venice a founding father. Perhaps it doesn't matter. What matters is the idea, a leader chosen by the people, accountable to the people, embodying the will of the community. This isn't quite democracy as we understand it, but it isn't monarchy either. It's something in between, something uniquely Venetian, and it will define how Venice operates for the next 11 centuries. Close your eyes and picture that moment. The year 697, a gathering of men on one of the larger islands. Rialto, perhaps, which is starting to emerge as the center of the scattered communities. They're dressed simply, no elaborate costumes yet, no crimson robes and golden ducal horns. Just merchants and fishermen and community leaders trying to figure out how to govern themselves. They argue, no doubt. They disagree. But eventually they come to consensus. They choose one of their own. And in that choosing, in that act of collective decision-making, Venice is truly born. Not as a city yet, but as an idea, as a way of being. The tide is coming in now. Can you hear it? The gentle rush of water filling the canals, lifting the boats, raising the level inch by inch. This is the rhythm that governed Venetian life. Not the sun, not the seasons, but the twice-daily pulse of the tide. High tide and low tide. The city breathing in and breathing out. Everything scheduled around this rhythm. Work that could only be done when the water was high. Work that could only be done when it was low. A city in constant negotiation with the sea. And at night, when the work was done, when the hammering of piles finally stopped, when families gathered in their small wooden houses, what did they think about? Did they worry about the future? Did they wonder if their children would still be here in 10 years, 50 years, 100? Or did they simply do what humans have always done? Put one foot in front of the other, solve the problem right in front of them, and trust that tomorrow would take care of itself. Let your thoughts drift now, like a gondola with no one rowing, just following the current. We're going to move forward in time, but slowly, gently, letting the centuries unfold like morning fog lifting from the lagoon. The 8th century arrives, then the 9th. Buildings are rising, not quickly but steadily. Wooden structures giving way to brick, brick giving way to stone. The population is growing. More refugees arrive from the mainland, fleeing new wars, new invasions. The lagoon is no longer just a hiding place. It's becoming something else. A hub, a crossing point. Because of geography, you see. Look at a map of the Mediterranean. Look at where Venice sits, at the very top of the Adriatic Sea, the closest point between Western Europe and the East, between the forests and farms of Italy and Germany and France, and the spices and silks and wonders of Constantinople, of Egypt, of distant lands whose names Europeans can barely pronounce. Venice is perfectly positioned to be a bridge, a translator, a middleman, and the Venetians are beginning to realize this. Beginning to understand that their greatest resource isn't land or crops or minerals. It's location and knowledge. Knowledge of the sea, of navigation, of how to move goods from here to there and take a profit in between. The shipyards are growing. At first just small workshops where carpenters repair fishing boats. but gradually something larger, more organized, more ambitious. Can you smell the shipyard? The sharp tang of fresh-cut wood, the bitter scent of tar and pitch used to seal the hulls, the salt smell of the sea that never quite goes away. And underneath it all, the sweat of men working in the sun, shaping timber into vessels that will carry Venice's fortune across the waves. They're building cargo ships now, round-bellied merchant vessels called naves, capable of carrying tons of goods across the Adriatic, and galleys, long sleek ships powered by oars, fast and maneuverable, able to navigate even when the wind dies. Each ship requires a forest's worth of timber, hundreds of planks, carefully shaped and fitted, thousands of wooden pegs and iron nails, rope for rigging, sailcloth, tar. The amount of resources, the complexity of organization required to build even one seagoing vessel is staggering. And Venice is building dozens, then hundreds, then eventually thousands. But we're still in the early days, the 9th century. Venice is growing but still fragile, still vulnerable. And then something happens that will test everything they've built, everything they've become. In the year 828, two Venetian merchants, Buono de Malamaco and Rustico de Torcello, arrive back from Alexandria in Egypt. They're smuggling something so precious, so politically explosive, that they've hidden it in a barrel of pork to get it past the Muslim guards. They're smuggling the body of Saint Mark the Evangelist. Or at least, they claim it's the body of Saint Mark. Whether it actually is or not is lost to history. But what matters is that Venice believes it. Venice needs to believe it, because every great city in medieval Europe needs a patron saint, needs holy relics, needs divine legitimacy. Rome has Saint Peter, Santiago has Saint James, and now Venice has Saint Mark. Can you imagine the procession when the merchants arrive? The way the news spreads through the lagoon communities like fire through dry grass. The crowds gathering as the barrel is opened, as the bones are revealed. The Doge at the time is Giustiniano Participazio. He immediately orders a church to be built to house the sacred remains. Not just any church, a basilica, something grand enough to match the magnificence of the relic it will contain. This is the first St. Mark's Basilica, not the one you can visit today. That will come later, rebuilt and expanded over centuries. But the first one, rising beside the Doge's palace on Rialto, its domes reaching toward heaven, its walls gleaming with marble stolen. No, let's be honest, stolen from ancient Roman buildings on the mainland. And with this act, with this theft disguised as piety, Venice transforms itself. It's no longer just a collection of pragmatic merchants and fishermen. It's a holy city, a city with a divine mission, a city protected by one of Christ's own apostles. The symbol of Saint Mark is the winged lion. You'll see it everywhere in Venice, carved in stone, painted on flags, stamped on coins. The Lion of Saint Mark, majestic and fierce, holding a book that reads Pax Tibi Mars, Evangelista Meus. Peace unto you, Mark, my evangelist. But look closely at these lions. Some of them are holding a sword instead of a book. Do you know why? Because Venice needed Saint Mark to be more than peaceful. Venice needed him to bless their wars, their conquests, their ruthless pursuit of profit. So they gave him a sword too. Peace when possible, war when necessary, always profitable. This duality, this ability to be both merchant and warrior, both pious and practical, both communal and cutthroat, will define Venice for centuries. It's already there in these early years. Already visible if you know how to look. The sun is setting now over the lagoon. The 9th century is fading into the 10th. The wooden piles beneath the buildings have been underwater for generations, turning slowly to stone. The tides have risen and fallen 30,000 times. The canals have witnessed births and deaths, and the endless small dramas of human life. And Venice is no longer a refuge. It's becoming a power. But we have hours yet ahead of us, centuries to explore. So let your breathing deepen. Let your body sink into comfort. The empire is just beginning to wake up, to stretch its limbs, to realize what it might become. The water is dark and patient. The story is long and slow, and we're going to follow it all the way down. Part 2, the rise of the maritime power. We're standing now at the edge of the arsenal, in the year 1104. It's just beginning. Just a few wooden sheds clustered on a patch of reclaimed land in the eastern part of Venice. A few dozen workers. A handful of ships under construction. In 300 years, this will be the largest industrial complex in the world. A factory that can build a complete warship in a single day. a miracle of organization and efficiency that won't be matched until the Industrial Revolution. But right now it's just starting, just learning, just figuring out what it might become. Why here? Why this spot? If you look at a map of Venice, you'll see the arsenal occupies a large inlet, a natural basin that's sheltered from the waves but connected to the lagoon. It's perfect for shipbuilding, protected water where vessels can be launched. Enough space to expand, close enough to the heart of Venice to be controlled, far enough to keep the noise and smell of industry at a distance. But more than geography, the arsenal represents an idea, a revolutionary idea for medieval Europe. The idea that shipbuilding shouldn't be done by individual artisans working independently, but by a coordinated system. An assembly line before anyone had a name for such a thing. Take a deep breath. Smell the arsenal. Not the clean historical preservation smell, but the real smell. Fresh cut wood, yes, but also tar. Hot pitch boiling in great cauldrons, used to seal every seam, every joint, making the ships watertight. The acrid smoke from the tar fires. The metallic tang of iron being worked in forges. Sweat. Salt. The particular smell of wet rope. Hemp rope, thick as your wrist, miles and miles of it required for each ship's rigging. And underneath it all, the smell of ambition. The workers arrive at dawn. Carpenters, caulkers, rope makers, sail makers, oar makers, blacksmiths, each with their specific skill, their specific role in the larger process. They're not wealthy men. Most of them live in small houses in the surrounding neighborhoods, Castello, largely. They walk to work through narrow streets still dark in the early morning, carrying their tools, thinking about the day ahead. What did they think about, these men who built the Venetian fleet? Did they understand that they were making history? Or did they just focus on the task at hand, shaping this plank, hammering this peg, testing this joint? Probably the latter. That's how great things are usually built. Not by people trying to be historical, but by people trying to do their job well. Let's watch a ship being built. Slowly. Step by step. Because this is where Venice's power comes from. Not from prayers or politics, but from this. The ability to build vessels that can cross seas, carry cargo, win battles. First, the keel. The spine of the ship. A single mass of timber, straight as you can make it, cut from the tallest oak you can find. It's laid out on the slipway, a wooden ramp that slopes gently down to the water. The keel determines everything else. Get it wrong and the whole ship will be crooked, will sail poorly, will be weak. 3 master carpenters examine the keel timber for hours before approving it. They run their hands along its length, feeling for flaws invisible to the eye. They sight down its length, checking for any deviation from true. Only when all 3 agree will the work proceed. Can you feel the weight of that decision? The responsibility? One mistake now will echo through every subsequent step, through every voyage this ship will make. Get it right, and this vessel might sail for 20 years. Get it wrong, and it might sink on its maiden voyage with all hands lost. Medieval Venice didn't have margin for error. Every ship was precious. Every ship represented an enormous investment of resources and labor. Every ship lost was a tragedy not just for the sailors, but for the city itself. Once the keel is approved, the ribs begin to go up. These are the curved timbers that will define the ship's shape, that will support the planking of the hull. Finding properly curved timber is an art in itself. You can't just cut straight trees and bend them. Well, you can, but they'll break or weaken. You need to find trees that grew naturally curved, branches that bent toward the sun, timber that holds its curve without stress. This means the arsenal maintains agents throughout the forests of the Adriatic. Men who do nothing but walk through woods, marking trees, noting which branches might be useful in 5 years, 10 years. Planning ahead. Always planning ahead. The Venetian forests in Istria and Dalmatia are carefully managed. Not stripped bare, but harvested sustainably. Because the Venetians understand something that many medieval societies didn't. If you use up your resources now, you'll have nothing for tomorrow. The sea might be infinite, but the forests that provide your ships are not. Month by month, the ship takes shape. The ribs are attached to the keel. The planking goes on, each plank carefully shaped to fit its neighbors, creating a smooth hull. The deck is laid. The mast is stepped, another single mass of timber, this one straight and tall, able to hold the weight of a huge triangular sail. If you were to stand here at the arsenal at any given moment, you'd see not one ship but dozens in various stages of completion, like a forest of wooden skeletons slowly becoming whole. And everywhere the constant sound of work, hammering, sawing, shouting, the creak of ropes as heavy timbers are hoisted into place. Do you know what a caulker does? It's one of the most important and least glamorous jobs in shipbuilding. After the planks are fitted together, every seam between them must be sealed. The caulker takes oakum, old rope that's been picked apart into individual fibers, and hammers it into the seams using a mallet and a caulking iron. Ram the oakum in tight, then cover it with hot pitch to seal it. Every single seam in the entire ship. Miles of seams. Days of repetitive, brutal work. Your hands go numb. Your back aches. The hot pitch burns your skin if you're not careful. But if the caulker does his job poorly, water seeps in. The ship leaks. In calm water, maybe you can bail fast enough. In a storm, you sink. So the caulkers are respected. Well paid by medieval standards. Because everyone knows, the caulker's skill keeps the sea where it belongs, outside the hull. Months pass. The ship is complete. It sits on the slipway, ready for launch. This is always a moment of ceremony, of anxiety. Will it float properly? Will it be balanced? Will it leak more than is acceptable? All wooden ships leak a little. The question is how much? The launch is at high tide. Wooden blocks are knocked away. The ship begins to slide down the slipway, gathering speed, and then splash. It hits the water. For a moment, everyone holds their breath. The ship settles, bobs, floats. A cheer goes up. But the work isn't done. Now the ship must be fitted out. Rigged. The ropes, there are dozens of different ropes, each with a specific name and function, must be run through blocks and attached to the proper points on deck and mast. The sail must be attached, tested. Oars must be fitted if it's a galley. Supplies must be loaded. Barrels of fresh water. Barrels of wine. Hardtack. Salted meat. Navigation instruments. Weapons. A merchant ship might carry a small crew, 10 or 15 men for a modest vessel. But a war galley requires over 200 rowers, plus sailors and soldiers. Imagine coordinating that, feeding that, paying that. The logistics are staggering, and Venice is building dozens of these ships every year, eventually hundreds. The arsenal grows year by year. More basins, more slipways, more warehouses, more forges. By the height of Venice's power in the 15th century, the arsenal employs over 16,000 workers. 16,000. In a city whose total population is only about 150,000. One person in 10 works at the arsenal. Think about that. The entire city's economy, its power, its survival, is bound up in this one massive industrial complex. But we're getting ahead of ourselves again. Let's return to the 12th century. The arsenal is still young. Venice is still growing, still learning what it can become. Salt and silk. Let's drift now from the shipyards to the merchants' warehouses. From the making of ships to the using of them. Because a ship is only valuable if it has somewhere to go. It's the middle of the 11th century. The year 1050, let's say. You're a Venetian merchant. Maybe your family has been in Venice for generations, descendants of those original refugees. Or maybe you arrived more recently, drawn by the opportunities, by the whisper of wealth that's starting to surround this strange city built on water. You have a ship. Well, you have shares in a ship. You can't afford to own an entire vessel yourself. That would require more capital than all but the richest families possess. So you've gone into partnership with other merchants. This is common. This is how Venice works. Spreading risk. No single person should be able to be destroyed by a single disaster. Your ship is loaded. In the hold, salt. Barrels and barrels of salt harvested from the lagoon's salt pans. It doesn't seem like much, does it? Salt. But in medieval Europe, salt is life. It's how you preserve meat, how you preserve fish. Without salt, you can't survive winter. Without salt, armies can't march because they can't carry food that won't spoil. Venice has salt. Other places need salt. This is the foundation of everything. Your ship sails south down the Adriatic. How long does it take? In good weather, with favorable winds, you can make Constantinople in 2 weeks. But weather is rarely that cooperative. More often, it's a month or more. You hug the coastline, stopping at ports along the way. Dubrovnik, Corfu, small trading posts where you exchange information as much as goods. What's the word from the south? Are the pirates active? Which routes are safe? Who's at war with whom? Information is wealth. Information keeps you alive. Constantinople. Miklagard, the Vikings call it, the great city. To a Venetian from a city of wooden buildings and narrow islands, Constantinople is overwhelming. Massive stone walls. The great church of Hagia Sophia, with its impossible dome. Markets selling goods from India, from China, from places so distant their names sound like fantasy. You sell your salt. The profit is decent, but not spectacular. Salt alone won't make you rich. But now you take those profits and you buy silk. Raw silk from China, or finished silk cloth from Syrian weavers. Spices, pepper, cinnamon, cloves. Dyes. Precious stones. Things that are abundant in the East but rare in Europe. These goods are small but valuable. High profit per unit of weight. This is crucial for maritime trade. You need to carry things that are worth the risk and the time. The journey back takes even longer because you're fighting the prevailing winds and currents. Maybe 2 months. Maybe 3 if the weather turns. You lose 2 sailors to fever in Ragusa. You lose a third when he falls from the rigging in a storm. This is expected. Death is part of the business model. But if you make it back to Venice with your cargo intact, the profit is enormous. You sell the silk to merchants who will carry it overland to France, to Germany, to England. You sell the spices to nobles and monasteries. Your initial investment of, let's say, 100 ducats might return 300, or 500, or more. Of course, you might also lose everything. Pirates, storms, a war you didn't know about until you sailed into it. A merchant's life is one of calculated risk. You're always gambling, always trying to read the odds. But here's the thing, Venice as a system is designed to manage this risk. Yes, individual merchants might be ruined, but the city as a whole keeps growing because the successful voyages outweigh the disasters, because insurance and partnerships spread the risk, because information flows back and forth, helping everyone make better decisions. It's not just about being brave or lucky. It's about being systematic, organized, efficient. Let your mind drift through these trade routes now. Follow the ships across the blue-green Adriatic. Watch them disappear over the horizon, sails taut with wind, headed toward fortune or doom. Feel the rhythm of it, the slow accumulation of wealth, the gradual transformation of a muddy lagoon settlement into a maritime power. Because that's what's happening, decade by decade. Venice is getting richer, and wealth means influence. Wealth means power. Wealth means the ability to build more ships, to take more risks, to reach farther. By the end of the 11th century, Venice has become crucial to the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantines need Venetian ships to move troops, to supply armies, to maintain their own crumbling maritime power. In return, Venice wins trading privileges, tax exemptions, the right to maintain a quarter in Constantinople where Venetian merchants can live and trade under their own laws. This is the beginning of something new. Venice isn't just trading with empires. It's starting to negotiate with them as equals, starting to have its own foreign policy, its own alliances and rivalries. And with power comes enemies, the first of many wars. It's late at night now. Can you feel it? The way the story is settling into your bones, the way your breathing has slowed, the way the centuries are beginning to blur together like the wake behind a ship. Good. That's exactly how it should feel. We're not rushing. We're drifting, letting Venice reveal itself layer by layer. The year 1123. Venice is at war with the Kingdom of Hungary. Why? Because Hungary wants to control the ports on the Dalmatian coast. The same ports Venice uses. The same ports where Venice harvests timber and salt and trades with the interior of Europe. You can't have 2 powers trying to control the same coastline. One of them has to back down. And Venice never backs down. Not when survival is at stake. The war is brutal but brief. Venetian galleys raid Hungarian coastal settlements. Hungarian armies march to the coast but find nothing to attack. The Venetians retreat to their ships whenever the armies approach. It's a frustrating, asymmetric war. The Hungarians have more soldiers, but Venice has more mobility, more reach. In the end, Hungary negotiates peace. Venice keeps its trading posts, keeps its access to timber and salt. But now everyone knows something they only suspected before. Venice might be small, might be strange, might be built on mud, but it's willing to fight for what it needs. And fight it will, again and again, because the Mediterranean is becoming crowded with ambitions. The Crusaders bargain. Let your breathing deepen now. We're moving into the 12th century, into one of the strangest chapters in Venice's long story. A chapter where faith and profit become so entangled that no one can quite tell them apart anymore. It's the year 1095. In Clermont, France, Pope Urban II calls for a crusade to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim rule. Thousands of European nobles and peasants answer the call. driven by piety, by the promise of forgiveness for their sins, by dreams of glory and land in the Holy Land. But there's a problem, a logistical problem. How do you move tens of thousands of armed men from Europe to Palestine? You can't march the whole way. The Byzantine Empire controls the land routes and isn't entirely cooperative. You need ships. Lots of ships. And who has lots of ships? Venice watches the Crusades with interest. Not religious interest, necessarily, though the Venetians are pious enough in their way. But practical interest. Here is an opportunity. These crusaders need transport. They need supplies. They need ships to carry them across the Mediterranean. And they have money. Or at least, they have promises of money. The First Crusade in 1096 largely bypasses Venice. Most of those crusaders march overland. But subsequent crusades learn the lesson. Sea transport is faster, safer, more reliable. By the Third Crusade in 1189, Venice is crucial to the entire enterprise. Picture the harbor in those years. War galleys being outfitted. Supply ships being loaded with weapons, with horses, with barrels of wine and grain. Thousands of crusaders camped on the Lido, the long sandy island that protects the lagoon from the open sea. Waiting for ships, waiting for favorable winds, waiting to sail toward what they believe will be glory. What do you think the Venetians thought of these crusaders? These foreign warriors with their crosses stitched on their tunics, their absolute certainty that God was on their side? Did the Venetians believe in the cause? Or did they simply seek customers? Probably both. That's the Venetian way. You can believe in something and profit from it simultaneously. You can be sincere in your faith and ruthless in your business dealings. These things aren't contradictory to the Venetian mind. They're complementary. But the Fourth Crusade, the Fourth Crusade, this is where things get interesting, where the mask slips and you see Venice's true nature. It's 1201. The Crusader leaders approach Venice with a proposal. They want to hire the entire Venetian fleet to transport 33,000 Crusaders to Egypt. From there, they'll march on Jerusalem. They offer to pay 85,000 marks of silver, an enormous sum. The Doge at this time is Enrico Dandolo. He's old, in his 90s, and blind, or nearly so, but his mind is sharp as ever. Sharper, perhaps, because age has stripped away any pretense of idealism. Dandolo agrees to the deal. But then he goes further. Venice will not only provide ships, it will provide 50 war galleys, fully crewed, at its own expense. In return, Venice wants half of everything the Crusaders conquer. The Crusader leaders agree. They don't have much choice. Without Venice, there's no crusade. The Venetians begin building ships. An enormous construction project. The arsenal works day and night for over a year. Meanwhile, Dandolo imposes a kind of temporary economic freeze on the rest of Venetian commerce. Every resource goes toward the crusade. Every shipwright, every sailor is directed toward this one massive project. Can you imagine the atmosphere in Venice during this time? The sense of purpose? The enormous gamble? Everything is riding on this deal. If it succeeds, Venice will be richer and more powerful than ever. If it fails, if the Crusaders can't pay, if the ships sink, if the whole enterprise collapses, Venice will be ruined. Summer of 1202. The Crusaders begin arriving in Venice. They camp on the Lido. But there's a problem. Only about 12,000 Crusaders show up. Not 33,000. The rest decided not to come, or took other routes, or simply didn't have the money. And that means the Crusaders can't pay. They owe 85,000 marks, but can only scrape together 51,000. Venice has built an entire fleet, has suspended normal commerce for over a year, has invested everything in this venture. And now the Crusaders are saying they can't pay. Dandolo has a solution. The Crusaders will work off their debt. There's a city on the Dalmatian coast, Zara, that used to be under Venetian control, but has rebelled and placed itself under Hungarian protection. The Crusaders will help Venice retake Zara. That will settle part of the debt. The Crusaders are uncomfortable with this. Zara is a Christian city. They're supposed to be fighting Muslims, not fellow Christians. But what choice do they have? They're stranded in Venice with no money and no way to get to the Holy Land. So they agree. November 1202. The combined Venetian and Crusader fleet attacks Zara. The city falls in 5 days. It's sacked brutally. Churches are looted. Citizens are killed or enslaved. The Pope, when he hears about this, excommunicates everyone involved. But Dandolo isn't finished. There's still debt to be paid. And now there's an opportunity. A Byzantine prince has approached the Crusaders with a proposition. Help him take the throne in Constantinople, and he'll pay them handsomely, more than enough to settle their debt to Venice and continue to Jerusalem. Again, the Crusaders are uncomfortable. But again, they agree. April 1204. The Crusader Venetian fleet arrives at Constantinople, the greatest city in Christendom, the heir to Rome, the bulwark against the East, and they attack it. Let this moment settle in your mind. Can you picture it? The massive walls of Constantinople, walls that have stood for 800 years, walls that have repelled countless invasions. And now a fleet flying Christian banners is preparing to assault them. The first attack fails. The walls are too strong. But Dandolo, 90-something years old and blind, personally leads the second attack. The Venetians tie their ships together and build floating siege towers. They bring them right up to the walls, and they break through. What follows is one of the worst sacks in history. 3 days of looting, burning, rape, murder. The Crusaders and Venetians tear through Constantinople like locusts. Priceless manuscripts are destroyed. Ancient artwork is melted down for the metal. Churches are ransacked. The bronze horses that stood in the hippodrome for 1,000 years are stolen and shipped back to Venice, where they'll stand on St. Mark's Basilica for the next 8 centuries. The wealth stripped from Constantinople is beyond calculation. Jewels, gold, silver, relics, works of art. It all flows back to Venice. The city transforms overnight. Suddenly there's money for everything. New buildings, new art, new ambitions. But at what cost? The Byzantine Empire never fully recovers from this blow. The great Christian power in the East is fatally weakened. Within 2 centuries, Constantinople will fall to the Ottomans. And some historians will trace that fall directly back to 1204, to the moment when Venice chose profit over faith. Did the Venetians feel guilty? It's hard to say. They certainly didn't act guilty. They displayed their stolen treasures proudly. The bronze horses, the countless relics, the marble and porphyry columns they ripped from Byzantine buildings and incorporated into their own. Maybe they told themselves it was God's will. Or maybe they were simply honest with themselves about what they were, merchants who would do whatever it took to survive and thrive. What would you have done? If you were a Venetian merchant in 1204, watching the ships return laden with treasure, would you have protested? Would you have called it theft? Or would you have accepted your share of the spoils and told yourself that this was simply how the world worked? Let these questions drift through your mind like fog across the lagoon. There are no easy answers. There never are with Venice. The water is dark tonight. The wealth of empires sinks beneath its surface, out of sight but never quite forgotten. Part 3. Venice at its height, mourning in the Golden Age. The 13th century is breaking like dawn over the lagoon. Soft light, the mist beginning to lift. Everything covered in gold, or at least the appearance of gold. Venice has never been wealthier. The treasure from Constantinople has been invested in new buildings, new ships, new trade routes. The city is transforming from a collection of wooden structures into something magnificent. Something that will make visitors gasp when they first see it rising from the water. Let's walk through this Venice together, slowly, taking in everything, because this is the city at its height, and we want to remember every detail. It's early morning. The year is 1250. You're standing on the Rialto, not the stone bridge you might have seen in photographs that won't be built for another 300 years, but a wooden bridge, already the commercial heart of Venice, connecting the 2 banks of the Grand Canal. The market is just opening. Fishermen are bringing in their night's catch. You can smell it, the sharp salt smell of fresh fish, still flopping in baskets. Sole, bass, the occasional eel. The fishmongers are setting up their stalls, calling out their wares in Venetian dialect, a language that's neither quite Italian nor quite anything else, a language shaped by water and trade. Vegetable sellers are arriving from the mainland. They've rowed across the lagoon before dawn, their boats loaded with produce from the farms of the Veneto. Cabbages, onions, in summer melons, in autumn pumpkins. These are precious goods in Venice. Remember, nothing grows in the lagoon itself. Every vegetable, every piece of fruit, every grain of wheat has to be imported. But Venice can afford it now. Venice can afford anything. Walk with me away from the market, down one of the narrow streets. We call them calli here, not streets. So narrow that you can barely stretch your arms out to both sides. The buildings rise 3, 4, sometimes 5 stories above you, cutting out most of the sky. It's dim down here, even in midday. The sun only reaches the street for an hour or 2 when it's directly overhead. The buildings are changing. Brick is replacing wood. Stone is becoming more common. And everywhere, you see the influence of Constantinople. Byzantine arches. Elaborate decoration. The famous Venetian Byzantine style that will define the city's architecture for centuries. Look up at the windows. They're different from mainland Italian windows. Thinner. More delicate. Multiple arched openings grouped together. They're designed to let in light and air, but keep out the intense summer sun. In winter, they'll be covered with oiled cloth. Glass is still expensive, though Venice is beginning to make that on Murano. Murano. The glass island. Should we go there? It's a short boat ride. The glassmakers were moved to Murano decades ago because of fire risk. Glass furnaces burn incredibly hot, and Venice, built largely of wood, was tired of burning down every few years. So the glassmakers went to Murano, and in isolation, in secrecy, they developed techniques that make Venetian glass the finest in the world. You can see the furnaces glowing even from a distance. Day and night they burn. Because once you've got a glass furnace up to temperature, you don't want to let it cool. It takes days to reheat, and each heating stresses the bricks. So they burn continuously, and the glass blowers work in shifts. Have you ever watched glass being blown? It's like watching someone breathe life into light. The molten glass at the end of the pipe, glowing orange-yellow. The glass blower turning it, shaping it with tools and with his breath, with decades of skill embedded in his hands. A bubble forms, grows, takes shape, becomes a cup, a bowl, a delicate goblet almost too beautiful to use. The secrets of Venetian glassmaking are protected by death. Literally. If a glassmaker tries to leave Venice and set up shop elsewhere, taking the secrets with him, Venice will send assassins. This isn't a metaphor. This is policy. The techniques that make Venetian glass special. The clarity, the colors, the delicate patterns. These are state secrets, as valuable as any military intelligence. Does that seem harsh to you? Maybe it is. But this is how Venice protects its advantages. Knowledge is wealth. Unique knowledge is immense wealth. And Venice will kill to protect it. Let's drift back to the main city. The sun is higher now. The calli are filling with people. Merchants heading to their warehouses. Servants running errands. Children playing complicated games involving sticks and imagination. Priests and monks moving between churches. There are over 200 churches in Venice by this point. Some of them tiny, tucked into corners you'd never notice unless you were looking. And everywhere you hear water. The splash of oars. The slap of small waves against stone. The liquid echo of sound traveling across canals. Venice is never quiet. Even at night, there's always the water, always moving, always speaking in its patient voice. What about the people who live here? Not the wealthy merchants, not the nobility, but the regular workers. Where do they live? Most Venetians live in apartments. Not like modern apartments, but medieval ones. A few rooms in a larger building, shared walls with neighbors, shared courtyards, communal wells. Privacy is a luxury that only the rich can afford. A typical worker's family, let's say a carpenter at the arsenal, lives in 3 rooms on the 2nd floor of a building in Castello. 1 room for sleeping, where the entire family shares a large bed or sleeps on straw mattresses on the floor. 1 room that serves as kitchen and living space, with a small fireplace for cooking. 1 room for storage, for tools, for anything that needs to be kept dry. There's no running water, of course. Water comes from the communal well in the courtyard, rainwater collected from the roofs, filtered through sand, stored in underground cisterns. In summer, when rain is scarce, water is precious. You use it carefully. You don't waste a drop. There's no bathroom either. A chamber pot, emptied into the canal each morning. Yes, into the canal. The tide flushes it out twice a day. Usually. Mostly. Venice smells ripe in summer, though Venetians are nose-blind to it. To them, this is just what a city smells like. The carpenter wakes before dawn. Eats bread and cheese if there is any, maybe drinks some watered wine. Kisses his wife, who's already awake, already starting the day's work. There's always washing, mending, cooking, managing the household. He walks through dark streets to the arsenal, joins hundreds of other men arriving for the day's work. The work is hard but steady. He's paid in silver soldini, enough to feed his family, to keep a roof over their heads, maybe even to save a little. His sons will follow him into the trade. His daughters will marry other arsenal workers. This is how Venice perpetuates itself, generation after generation. In the evening, he comes home tired, muscles aching. Eats whatever his wife has prepared. Fish, probably, maybe some beans, bread. talks with his neighbors in the courtyard. Everyone knows everyone in these neighborhoods. Your business is their business. Your troubles are their troubles. It's claustrophobic sometimes, but it's also security. You're never alone. Never without help if you need it. Is he happy? What a strange question. He probably never asks himself that. He has work. He has family. He has enough to eat most days. By medieval standards, that's not just happiness, that's good fortune. At night, the city quiets. Not silent, never silent, but quieter. The work stops. The markets close. People retreat into their homes. Oil lamps are lit, expensive, so use sparingly. Most families go to bed when it gets dark, wake when it gets light. Candles are for the wealthy, for churches, for special occasions. But some parts of the city never sleep. The arsenal, for one. There's always work there, always ships being built or repaired. The bakeries, for another. The big communal ovens that everyone uses. They burn through the night because it's not efficient to let them cool. And the brothels, clustered in certain neighborhoods, particularly around the Rialto. Venice licenses and regulates prostitution, taxes it like any other trade. Practical, always practical. And in the palaces along the Grand Canal, in the great houses of the merchant families, there's light and music and plotting. The families who rule. Let your breath slow now. We're going to look at power. Not the dramatic kind, not battles and conquests, but the quiet accumulation of influence that happens in offices and marriage beds and whispered conversations. Venice is a republic. This is important. It's not a kingdom. There's no hereditary monarch. The Doge is elected, serves for life, but is bound by law, checked by councils, unable to act alone. And yet, Venice is ruled by an oligarchy, by families. About 20 or 30 families at any given time hold real power. They've been wealthy for generations. They own the ships, control the trade routes, sit on all the important councils. They intermarry, strengthening their hold, creating a web of kinship and obligation that's impossible to break from outside. The Contarini family, the Morosini, the Dandolo, the Mocenigo, the Cornaro, names that echo through Venetian history like a litany. If you're born into one of these families, your future is assured. You'll be educated, trained in commerce and politics, given opportunities that ordinary Venetians can never dream of. You might become Doge. You'll certainly become wealthy. If you're not born into one of these families, you can still succeed in Venice. The city needs talent, rewards merit, but there's a ceiling. You'll never quite be one of them, never quite be admitted to the innermost circles. Is this fair? Of course not. Does it work? Remarkably well, for centuries. Because here's the thing about the Venetian oligarchy. It's not purely hereditary. You can't be completely incompetent and still hold power. The system has checks. If a family consistently produces idiots, it loses influence. If a new family shows exceptional ability, it can rise slowly over generations into the ruling class. It's not democracy, but it's not feudalism either. It's something in between, something uniquely Venetian. Government by committee, by consensus, by the wealthy and capable. The most important body is the Great Council, the Magyar Consiglio. In the 13th century, it has about 400 members, all men from the established families. They elect the Doge. They approve laws. They appoint officials to every position of importance in the Venetian state. But the Great Council is too large for quick decisions. So there's a smaller council, the Senate, about 60 men, who handle day-to-day governance. Foreign policy, trade regulation, war and peace. And then there's the Council of 10, created in 1310 after a failed coup attempt. 10 men, elected annually from the Great Council, tasked with protecting the state from internal threats. Treason, conspiracy, sedition. The Council of 10 meets in secret, investigates in secret, judges in secret. Their decisions are final and cannot be appealed. If you're accused by the Council of 10, you might disappear. Simply cease to exist. Your family might not even be told what happened to you. Your body might wash up in the lagoon, or it might not. The uncertainty is part of the deterrent. Does this frighten you? It should. This is one of the first secret police forces in European history, the model for much that comes later. And it exists because Venice values stability above freedom, security above individual rights. There's even a physical symbol of this, the lion's mouth. Carved stone lion heads placed around the city, with open mouths where you can slip a piece of paper. You can anonymously denounce anyone for any crime. The Council of 10 will investigate. This creates an atmosphere of paranoia, of course. You can't trust anyone completely. Your neighbor might denounce you out of spite. Your business partner might accuse you to eliminate competition. Your servant might inform on you to curry favor with the authorities. And yet, Venice functions, thrives even, perhaps because people know there are limits, know that absolute power is distributed among enough people that no single person can become a tyrant. The checks and balances, the committees and councils, the requirement for consensus, these prevent the worst abuses even as they enable lesser ones. What would it feel like to live in this system? To know that you're watched, that your words might be reported, that deviation from accepted norms could be dangerous? But also to know that the streets are safe, that contracts are enforced, that the city is powerful and wealthy, and your share of that wealth is secure as long as you don't make trouble? Maybe it would feel like a fair trade, security for silence, prosperity for obedience, or maybe it would feel like a slow strangulation of the soul. We can't know. The ordinary Venetians of the 13th century left no diaries, no confessions. We have only official records, only the view from above. But we can imagine, and in imagining, we can drift deeper into this strange city's heart. The plague arrives. The 14th century begins with Venice at its absolute zenith. The richest city in Europe, perhaps the richest city in the world. The Grand Canal lined with marble palaces. The arsenal employing thousands. Trade routes extending from London to Constantinople, from Alexandria to the Black Sea. Everything Venice touches seems to turn to gold. And then in 1347, something else arrives. The plague. It comes on ships, of course. Venice's lifeline is also its vulnerability. The disease that will kill 1/3 of Europe enters through maritime trade routes. From the Black Sea, from Crimea, where plague-infected corpses were catapulted over city walls during a siege. The disease traveled in the bodies of rats, in the blood of fleas, in the lungs of infected sailors who didn't know they were dying until they were already dead. It reaches Sicily first, then Genoa, then Venice. The first cases appear in the spring of 1348. Strange buboes, swellings in the groin and armpits, high fever, delirium, death within days, sometimes within hours. The disease moves through the dense neighborhoods like fire through dry grass. 1 person sick today, 5 tomorrow, 20 the day after. Venice tries to respond. The city government, for all its flaws, is organized and rational. They establish quarantine regulations. Ships arriving from infected ports must wait 40 days, 40 giorni, which gives us the word quarantine, before anyone can disembark. The sick are isolated on separate islands. The dead must be buried in mass graves outside the city. But it's not enough. Nothing is enough. The plague is too contagious, too deadly, too swift. By summer, people are dying faster than they can be buried. The smell of death hangs over the city. Smoke rises constantly from the pyres on the burial islands. Families are wiped out in days. Entire neighborhoods empty as those who can afford it flee to the countryside, to isolated villas where maybe, just maybe, the disease won't find them. The arsenal shuts down. The markets close. Ships sit empty at their moorings because there aren't enough healthy sailors to crew them. The government barely functions because so many officials are dead or dying. Can you imagine the terror? You wake up one morning feeling fine. By afternoon, you're feverish. By evening, the buboes have appeared. By dawn, you're dead. No treatment works. Prayer doesn't help. Wealth offers no protection. The rich die as easily as the poor. What would you do? How would you react? Would you stay and face it? Would you run? Would you abandon your sick family to save yourself? Or would you stay with them, knowing you'll probably die too? These aren't hypothetical questions. Every Venetian in 1348 had to answer them. Had to choose, in real time, what kind of person they were. Some fled. Some stayed. Some helped. Some looted. Human nature in its full spectrum, revealed by catastrophe. The plague burns through Venice for 2 years. In that time, the city loses perhaps half its population. Maybe more. The exact number is impossible to know. Records are fragmentary, sometimes contradictory. But when it finally fades in 1350, Venice is transformed. Empty houses, orphaned children, businesses without owners, ships without crews, silence where there used to be life. And yet, Venice survives. Venice always survives. This is perhaps the most remarkable thing about the city, its ability to absorb catastrophe and continue, to rebuild, to adapt, to persist. Within a decade, the city is functioning again. New workers are trained. New merchants rise to fill the gaps left by the dead. New families enter the Great Council to replace the old families that were extinguished. The machinery of the Venetian state, dented and damaged, grinds back into motion. But something has changed. Some essential optimism has been lost. The 14th century after the plague is darker than the 13th century before it. More cynical, more aware of mortality. The art becomes more somber. The politics become more defensive. Venice is still wealthy, still powerful. But the golden age is over, though it will take another century for everyone to realize it. Let your mind drift now through these empty streets, these plague-haunted canals. Feel the weight of loss, the silence where there used to be voices. The city is quieter now, and it will never be quite as loud again. Part 4. The Shadows of Empire, the Wars with Genoa. Sleep is creeping closer now, isn't it? Your body is heavy. Your thoughts are slowing. Good. Let yourself sink deeper. We're entering the darker part of the story, but told gently, told softly, like a lullaby about old sorrows. The 14th century passes in a series of wars. Not one long war, but several, separated by periods of exhausted peace. And always, always the enemy is the same. Genoa. Why does Venice hate Genoa? Why does Genoa hate Venice? The reasons are so old, so tangled, that by the 1350s no one quite remembers how it started. But it doesn't matter. The two cities are rivals for the same trade, the same routes, the same profits. There's not room in the Mediterranean for both to be supreme. One must dominate. One must submit. Neither will submit. The War of Chioggia, 1378 to 1381, is the closest Venice ever comes to destruction. Chioggia is a town at the southern end of the Venetian lagoon. Fishing town. Port town. Nothing special, except that if you control Chioggia, you control access to Venice itself. You can blockade the city, starve it into submission, and in August 1379, a Genoese fleet captures Chioggia. Picture the moment when the news reaches Venice. The Doge is Andrea Contarini, a capable man but old, tired. The war has been going on for a year already. Venice has won some battles, lost others. But this is catastrophic. Chioggia in enemy hands means Venice is besieged. Cut off from the sea. Cut off from trade. Cut off from food. Genoa thinks it's won. That Venice will have to surrender within months, maybe weeks. But Venice has one advantage that Genoa has underestimated. Venice knows the lagoon. Every channel, every mudflat, every shifting sandbar. The Genoese are excellent sailors on the open sea, but the lagoon is a different kind of water. Treacherous, complicated, home water. Venice launches a counterattack, but not the kind the Genoese expect. Instead of fighting ship to ship, the Venetians block the channels. They sink old hulks filled with stones in the narrow passages that connect Chioggia to the sea. They trap the Genoese fleet inside the lagoon. Now it's a siege, but reversed. The Genoese hold Chioggia, yes, but they can't leave. Can't resupply. Can't escape. And winter is coming. The siege lasts 6 months. 6 months of cold and hunger and disease. 6 months of skirmishes in the fog. 6 months of waiting. The Genoese try to break out. They fail. They try to get supplies through. Venice blocks them. They try to negotiate. Venice refuses. There will be no mercy. No compromise. Only surrender or death. Have you ever been in a situation where there's no way out? Where every option leads to disaster? That's where the Genoese find themselves. Trapped in a foreign lagoon, surrounded by enemies, slowly starving. In June 1380, they surrender. The entire fleet. The entire army. It's the greatest victory in Venetian history. The moment when the city's survival, hanging by a thread for months, suddenly becomes certain. But it's a Pyrrhic victory. Venice has bankrupted itself to win. The treasury is empty. The arsenal is damaged. Thousands of Venetians have died. And Genoa, though defeated, still exists. Still has ships. Still has ambitions. The war ends not because either side has achieved its goals, but because both sides are too exhausted to continue. The peace treaty is signed in Turin in 1381. Venice and Genoa agree to respect each other's trade zones, to not attack each other's ships, to settle disputes through negotiation rather than warfare. It's a lie, of course. Both sides are already planning the next war. But the lie holds for a generation, and sometimes that's enough. Venice has survived, but the effort has aged the city, made it cautious, made it conservative, made it afraid of risk in a way it never was before. And meanwhile, to the east, a new power is rising. a power that will make the rivalry with Genoa seem like a minor squabble between neighbors. The Ottoman Turks. The Eastern Shadow. Let your breathing slow even more now. We're drifting toward the 15th century, toward the long twilight of Venice's empire. The story is becoming quieter, more melancholy, but also more beautiful in its sadness. The Ottomans begin as a small Turkish principality in Anatolia, just one among many. But they have something the others lack: organization, discipline, and brilliant leadership. Through the 14th century they expand, slowly at first, then faster. They conquer other Turkish states. They cross into Europe. They surround Constantinople. Venice watches with concern, but not alarm. The Ottomans are far away. And besides, Venice has been trading with Muslim powers for centuries. The Mamluks in Egypt, the various emirates and sultanates scattered around the Mediterranean. Religion matters less than profit, and the Ottomans seem pragmatic, seem interested in trade rather than jihad. This is a miscalculation. The Ottomans are interested in trade, yes, but they're also interested in power, in expansion, in building an empire. In 1453, Sultan Mehmed II lays siege to Constantinople. The city has survived for over 1,000 years. Its walls have repelled countless attacks. It seems immortal, seems like it will stand forever. But Mehmed has something previous attackers didn't: cannons. Massive bronze cannons that can hurl stone balls weighing hundreds of pounds. Cannons that can slowly, patiently, pound ancient walls into rubble. The siege lasts 53 days. Constantinople begs for help, begs Venice to send its fleet. Venice debates, argues. The pro-war faction says Constantinople must be saved, that if it falls, Venice is next. The anti-war faction says Constantinople is doomed regardless, that Venice shouldn't waste resources on a lost cause. In the end, Venice sends a small force. Too small, too late, just enough to salve Venice's conscience, but not enough to matter. On May 29, 1453, the walls are breached. Ottoman soldiers pour into the city. Constantine XI, the last Roman emperor, dies fighting in the streets. The great church of Hagia Sophia is converted to a mosque. The looting lasts 3 days, as is traditional. When the news reaches Venice, there's shock, grief, but also, if we're honest, a kind of relief, because Constantinople's fall eliminates a rival. Venice no longer has to share Eastern Mediterranean trade with the Byzantines. And the Ottomans are saying they want to continue trading. That commerce will flow as before, just under new management. So Venice adjusts, negotiates new treaties with the Ottomans, establishes trade relations with the new power. Business as usual. But it's not usual. Not really. Because the Ottomans keep expanding. They take Serbia, Albania, Greece, Bosnia. They push west along the Dalmatian coast, threatening Venice's trade posts. They push south into Egypt, threatening Venice's spice routes. And Venice can't stop them. Venice's navy is still powerful, but navies can't conquer land. Can't hold territory against armies. The Ottomans have both a navy and an army, and the army is magnificent, disciplined, well-equipped, led by some of the finest generals of the age. Venice fights a series of wars with the Ottomans. The First Ottoman-Venetian War, 1463 to 1479. The Second, 1499 to 1503. The Third, 1537 to 1540. Each war ends with Venice ceding territory, paying tribute, accepting Ottoman dominance in yet another region. It's death by inches, death by slow retreat. Venice is still wealthy, still important, but no longer supreme. No longer able to dictate terms. Now Venice must negotiate, must accommodate, must accept the new reality. How does that feel, do you think? To be a proud city, a city that conquered Constantinople, that ruled the Mediterranean, and now to be slowly, inexorably pushed aside? To see your empire contract year by year, and now to be slowly, inexorably pushed aside? To see your empire contract year by year, your maps showing more red, more losses, more treaties that feel like bruises? That must have done something to the Venetian soul. A kind of quiet resignation, maybe. A melancholy strength. Like someone who has lived long enough to know that youth is gone, but dignity remains. And yet, Venice keeps going. This is one of the most fascinating things about this city. How it continues, even in decline. It stiffens its spine, adjusts its expectations, and keeps trading, keeps negotiating, keeps shaping the world in subtle ways long after its age of dominance is over. Take a breath here. Let your shoulders drop. Feel that gentle acceptance of time's pull, the way Venice does. because we're drifting now into the late 1400s and 1500s, where the shadows lengthen across the lagoon, and the empire begins its long twilight. Venice's greatest wound doesn't come from a war. It comes from a discovery. Vasco da Gama sails around Africa and reaches India. Suddenly, Europe doesn't need Venice anymore. It doesn't need the long caravan routes across Egypt. Doesn't need the merchants of Alexandria. Doesn't need the carefully negotiated Venetian spice convoys. Now they can sail to India directly. And Venice cannot follow. Their ships aren't built for the open Atlantic. They're too flat-bottomed, too dependent on oars, too fragile for ocean storms. For centuries, Venice controlled the gateway between east and west. Now the gateway has moved, and Venice is watching the ships sail past it, powerless to stop them. Have you ever experienced something like that? A moment when the world changes direction without warning, and suddenly you're standing in a place that used to be important, but now feels like a forgotten crossroads? This is what Venice feels in 1500. Not defeated, just bypassed. And sometimes bypassing hurts more than attack. Still they keep going. That's the Venetian way. The last wars. The 1500s bring yet more conflict. The War of the League of Cambrai, when almost every major European power joins forces to crush Venice once and for all. France, the papacy, the Holy Roman Empire, Spain, even some Italian neighbors who had once depended on Venice, all united to destroy this single city that dared to survive too long. And yet, Venice does survive. They lose territory on the mainland, yes. They lose fortresses. They lose soldiers. They lose money. They lose prestige. But they do not fall. In fact, by the end of the war, Venice still exists as a sovereign republic, damaged, smaller, but undefeated. Like an elder with scars but unbroken eyes. Picture that for a moment. A tiny city built on mudflats, resisting the combined armies of Europe. There's something quietly heroic about that. Not loud heroism. Not the kind sung in epics. But a stubborn, weary, honorable kind of endurance. The kind that feels human. Deeply human. The silent heroes. We rarely talk about the people who held the city together in these years. The oarsmen who rowed warships across impossible distances. The scribes who processed thousands of diplomatic letters. The shipwrights who kept building even as budgets shrank. The mothers who kept families together while the men went to war. The priests who kept faith alive when despair hung like fog over the lagoon. They don't have statues. Their names aren't on marble plaques. But without them, Venice wouldn't have lasted one winter of the 1500s. History isn't built by the great. It's built by the many. Maybe you know that feeling, doing essential work that no one will ever record, but without which everything would collapse. If you do, then you understand Venice. The tide turns. By 1600, Venice looks the same on the surface. Marble palaces, mirrored canals, bustling ports. But the energy has changed. There's more theater, more art, more festivals. But fewer victories, fewer trade convoys, fewer horizons to conquer. It's the beginning of a culture that looks backward more than forward. Refined, beautiful, but nostalgic. And nostalgia is always a sign that the present feels smaller than the past. Still, Venice remains Venice, a place too strange and too stubborn to die. And now, we drift into the final hours of the Republic, softly, gently. Part 5, the slow fade. The 1600s and 1700s are twilight centuries. Not darkness, just long, slow sunsets. Venice becomes a city of music and masks, of philosophers and courtesans, of art so rich that it almost disguises the decline beneath it. Can you hear it? The faint violin from an upper-floor window. The laughter behind a half-closed shutter. The splash of a gondola poling through a quiet canal. It's beautiful, painfully beautiful, like the last glowing ember of a great bonfire. But the world keeps changing, and Venice stays still. Trade continues to shift to the Atlantic. Empires rise in Holland, in England, in France. The Ottoman presence expands. Venetian territories fall one by one. Crete, Cyprus, islands of the Aegean. The map shrinks. The prestige shrinks. The confidence shrinks. But the city remains calm. Always calm, like someone who has learned to accept old age with grace. How do you respond to decline in your own life? Do you fight it? Deny it? Or do you, like Venice, let it wash over you like a tide, not giving up, but softening into what you are becoming? There's beauty in that too. A quieter beauty. The final blow. The end comes not from trade, or plague, or war, but from Napoleon. He marches into Venice without resistance. The Republic, after 1100 years, ends with barely a sound. No last battle, no heroic speeches, just a quiet surrender. Some say Venice died that day, but I don't think so. I think Venice simply changed, like a person who no longer has to perform an old role, finally allowing themselves to rest. And in that rest, something dreamlike takes root. Which brings us to our final hour. Part 6, Dreamlike Closing Hour. Let's walk now, gently, through a Venice you will never see in daylight. A pre-tourist Venice, a sleeping Venice, a Venice that remembers everything. It's just before dawn. The sky is that deep indigo that exists for only a few minutes before sunrise. The lanterns are still lit, their reflections trembling on the canal like small, ancient spirits. You hear almost nothing. A soft breeze, a lone gondolier poling home after a night's work. The distant toll of a monastery bell, low, slow, sleepy. This is the Venice that existed before the world discovered it. A Venice alive with secrets, with memory, with the quiet pulse of 1,000 years beneath your feet. Walk with me, down a narrow calle where the stones are still slick with night air, past a courtyard where a wellhead carved in 1200 stands quietly, patient as time, across a bridge with ironwork worn smooth by hands long gone. Everywhere you go, the city watches, listens, remembers. Have you ever walked alone at dawn and felt like the world was holding its breath? That's what Venice feels like now. The sun begins to rise slowly over the lagoon. A thin line of gold spreads across the water. The sky softens, the first birds stir, and the city shifts gently from dream to waking, from the memory of its empire to the reality of its present. But for a few moments, you're standing in a Venice untouched by the centuries. A Venice before tourists, before cameras, before the world arrived to look at what the Venetians built when no one was watching. Let the quiet wash over you. Let the centuries sink softly into your breathing. Let the water's rhythm become your own. Because all empires fade, all stories end, but some places remain. Venice is one of them, a dream that refuses to dissolve, a memory that refuses to be forgotten. And as the final light of dawn spills across the canals, the city whispers, gently, patiently, I am still here, and so are you, drifting peacefully into sleep.